So your quiz tomorrow is on 9.4 and 9.5. Quiz is going to be 10 questions. Only 2 of the questions you actually have to graph. So the rest of the questions will just ask you about the amplitude, period, all that fun stuff. So let's take a look at number 1. So we have to identify the amplitude and period. What is our amplitude? Our amplitude's 3 because our graph goes up to 3. And what is our period?
12.
12. We start here and we complete one full cycle to 12. So our period is 12. Number 2. What's our amplitude? 0.5. And what's our period? Pi over 2. So we start here and we complete one full cycle until we get back to the top here. So this one's a little bit deceiving because it keeps going, but our period is pi over 2 because that's where one full cycle is. On the quiz tomorrow, you may have a question that asks you about domain and range of a graph. So if we had, for number 2, if it asked us for our domain, what would our domain of this be? Remember, domain is all your x values. Our graph keeps going like this and keeps repeating that same shape. So our domain would be negative infinity to infinity or all real numbers. And then what do you think our range is? Remember, our ranges are y values. So how far up do we go and how far down do we go? So we go to negative 0.5, that's where our graph starts, and it ends at positive 0.5. So our range would be in between negative 0.5 and positive 0.5. Because it never goes past 0.5 here, and never goes past negative 0.5 down here. Just goes in between these. So that's our range.
The domain will always be all numbers.
Yes, for sine and cosine, your domain will always be all real numbers. So let's take a look at, we're going to do 5 and 6. If we have time, I'll come back and do 3 and 4, but they're pretty much the same thing. So for graphing sine, what's our A here? For number 5. Our A is 5. And what's our B? 4. So the A is the first number, B is the second one. A helps us find the amplitude, so what would our amplitude be? 5. B helps us find the period. What is our period? 2 pi over B, which is 2 pi over 4. So that would be pi over 2, yes. So let's go ahead and put those on our graph. Our graph's going to go all the way to pi over 2. And then we need our increments in between 0 and pi over 2. So how can we find our increments? Period divided by 4, because we're splitting this up into 4 equal parts. So we just take our period and divide it by 4. So pi over 2 divided by 4. What happens when we have a fraction in a fraction? Awesome. Keep change, flip. Keep the top, change multiplication, flip the bottom. So this is pi over 8. So that's our first increment. How do we find the second one? Add pi over 8 again. So when adding, you need your denominators to be the same, and you just add the numerators together. So pi plus pi is 2 pi, and the 8 in our denominator stays on the bottom. How can we simplify 2 pi over 8? Pi over 4. And then how do we find our third increment?
3 pi over 8.
How did you find that?
Add pi over 8 to 2 pi over 2.
So we add another pi over 8, and this gives us 3 pi over 8. Alright, next we want to see how high we go and how low we go. So what's our height of our graph here? 5. We go up whatever our amplitude is, and we go down whatever that amplitude is. So we go up to positive 5, down to negative 5. And now this is a sine graph. So where do we start?
At 0.
Our graph starts at 0, and then where do we go? So these are our key points. So for your quiz tomorrow, you're going to have one that you have to graph. Well, you'll have 2 that you have to graph. But you have to put your 5 key points, and you have to do your increments and your amplitude and all that fun stuff. So you got to have your period and 3 increments in between. And then those will give you your 5 key points. Any questions here? All right, let's look at number 6. Now we have a cosine one. So what's our A? 1 over 4. And what's our B? 2. So what's our amplitude? 1 over 4. And what's our period? So 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. So let's go ahead and graph it. So our period goes to pi. Now we want to find our 3 increments in between. So what should we do? Divide the period by 4. So we get pi over 4 for our first increment. How do we find the next one? Add another pi over 4, so that would give us 2 pi over 4. And what's 2 pi over 4 simplify to? Pi over 2. And then how do we find the third? Add another pi over 4, so this would give us 3 pi over 4. What's our amplitude? 1 over 4. So we go up to 1 over 4, down to negative 1 over 4, and then we put our points. For cosine, where do we start? We start up at the amplitude, then where do we go? Like that. And then we can just connect our dots. So this is our cosine graph. Your sine graph will always have this shape, and your cosine graph will always have this shape. Sine always starts at 0, cosine starts at 1, and then it's just the same pattern. Alright, let's take a look at number 1 in the matching section. So what's our amplitude here? Our amplitude's 2, and what's our period? 2 pi over 3. Can't simplify it, so just 2 and 2 pi over 3. You guys can match it with the answers, but we're just going to skip that because the important part is we know that what our amplitude is and what our period is. For number 3, what's our amplitude? 1, and what's our period? 2 pi over pi, because this is our b, so this simplifies to 2. For number 5, what's our amplitude? Our amplitude is 1. And what's our period? 2 pi over 1, which is just 2 pi. And for number 7, what's our amplitude? 2, and what's our period? 2 pi over pi, which is just 2. Any questions here? Alright, let's take a look at 9 and 10. So for 9, do you think this is going to be a sine graph or a cosine graph? Sine. Why do you think it's sine? So it's sine because it starts here at the center. So if we drew our graph here, like we know our sine is, sine goes from 0 up, back down to there. So it looks like this. But if we continued it on the left side of our y-axis, it would go like this. Same shape. Like this-ish. So we cross here at 0. So here we're crossing at 0. So that's why this is a sine graph. For our cosine, we start up at the amplitude and then go down. So it has like this shape. And then if we continued it to the left, it would have this shape. So here, at the y-axis is one of the highest points of our graph. It's one of those maximums. So here, since we have a max at the y-axis, that's why this is cosine. For your quiz, you won't have any that are shifted up or down like these are. They're all staying at the center here, but you could see one that looks like this. So, you might have some that are matching for tomorrow. Similar to this, but you won't have any that are shifted up or down. So 9.5, we're graphing tangent and cotangent. One of our big differences here is that for the period, for tangent and cotangent, it's pi over b. The other one was 2 pi over b. So here it's just pi over b. And then also we have asymptotes here too. So let's look at number 1. What's our a? 2. And what's our b? B is 4. But what's our period? Pi over 4. And then what's our asymptote going to be at? How do we find the asymptote for tangent? What was that? Divide the period by 2. So pi over 4 divided by 2. So keep change flip. We're multiplying by 1/2, so pi over 8. So our asymptote is at pi over 8. So let's go ahead and draw our graph here. We're going to go to the right pi over 8 and to the left pi over 8 and put our asymptotes there. So our asymptotes are those dotted lines or those brick walls that we can never cross. Now we want to find our key points here. So we're going to have a key point right in the middle of 0 and pi over 8 and right at the middle of 0 and negative pi over 8. So how do we find what our key points are? Take the asymptote and divide it by 2. So pi over 8 divided by 2. Keep change flip. So pi over 16. So we go the right pi over 16 and to the left to negative pi over 16. And then how far up and down do we go? We go up 2 and down 2. So now we have that little imaginary box there. Where are we going to put our points? Top right, middle, and bottom left. Once we have our 3 key points, we can just snake our graph through there. So important things about tangent graphs. They don't have to be perfect. All of your graphs don't have to be perfect. I understand we're not all artists in here. But you just have to make sure that you don't cross the asymptotes and that it's increasing. So it has to go in this direction. Can't be decreasing. Then that would be wrong. And can't cross the asymptotes. All right, let's take a look at number 3. We're going to do the other tangent one before we go to cotangent. So what's our A? 1/4. And what's our B? 2 pi. So what is our period? Pi over 2 pi, so that would be 1/2. And then what's our asymptote? 1/2 divided by 2, so keep change flip. 1/2 times 1/2 would be 1/4. So we're going to draw our graph here. We go to the right 1/4 and to the left 1/4. Then we put our asymptotes right through there. And then how can we find our key points in the middle? Divide the asymptote by 2. So 1/4 divided by 2 is the same thing as 1/4 times 1/2. So this would be 1/8. So we have 1/8 here and negative 1/8 here. And then what else do we need? So we're going to go up 1/4 and down 1/4. Negative 1/4. Now we have our little box there. So where are we going to put our key points once we have our box? The middle, top right, and bottom left. And we just draw our graph. Alright, let's do cotangent graphs now. So looking at number 2. What's our A? Our A is 3, and what's our B? 1/2. How do we find the period? So pi over 1/2. Keep change flip. So keep the top, change to multiplication, flip the bottom. So what does that give us for our period? 2 pi. What is our asymptote here? How do we find the asymptote? Not for cotangent. What's our asymptote for cotangent graphs? Anybody know? It is the same thing as the period. So the asymptote and the period are the same thing for cotangent. So let's go ahead and graph our asymptote. So we're going to go to 2 pi, put our dotted line through there, and then our other asymptote is at 0. So we're working on the right side of our graph here. So that's where it's different from tangent. Tangent, we have some negative values and positive values. That y-axis cuts our graph in half. Here for cotangent, we're just working on the right side, so it's all positive values. So our asymptote is the same thing. It's not getting cut in half here. Now we want to find our increments. So we want to find what halfway in the middle from 0 to 2 pi is. How can we do that? Divided by 2. So 2 pi divided by 2 would give us just pi. So right in the middle, we have pi. We want to find what halfway in between 0 and pi is also. So 1/4 of the way here. How do we find where our first increment is going to be? divide by 2. So pi divided by 2 is pi over 2. How do we find the third one? Awesome. We just add the first two together. So pi over 2 plus pi, which will be 3 pi over what? 3 pi over 2. So we want our denominators to be the same here since we're adding fractions, so we can multiply the top and the bottom by 2. So pi plus 2 pi would be 3 pi, and our denominator stays the same as 2. So 3 pi over 2. And then where are we going to put, what goes on our y-axis? How far up and how far down are we going? We go up to 3 and down to negative 3. That comes from our a. And now where do our key points go? Top left, middle, and bottom right. Perfect. Now we just draw our graph. All right, let's do another cotangent. So number 4. What's our A? 1/3. What's our B? Pi. How do we find the period? Pi over b, so pi over pi, and that would give us what? 1. And then what's our asymptote going to be? 1. So let's draw our graph. So we are going to go all the way to 1, and that's where our asymptote's going to be. And then what should we do next? We can put 1/3 at the top and negative 1/3 down here. We need our key points on the inside. So 1's going to go right in the middle. So how do we find what the middle of 0 and 1 is? Right, so 1 divided by 2 would just be 1/2. What do we have to do next? Divide it by 2 again to find what our first key point is going to be at over here. So 1/2 divided by 2 would be 1/4. And then how do we find where our third increment is here? Add the two together. So 1/4 plus 1/2 would be 3/4. Now where do our key points go? Perfect. Now we just draw our graph. All right, let's take a look at 1 and 3 down at the bottom. Again, we're matching. For number 1, do you think that's going to be a tangent graph or a cotangent graph? Tangent. Because not only it goes right through the y-axis, which only tangent does that, it's also increasing. And tangent's increasing. So this is tangent. What do you think for number 3? Cotangent, because it's just on the right side. It doesn't go through that y-axis, and it's decreasing. So this is cotangent.